The midday sun was merciless over the USS Independence, turning the carrier deck into a shimmering sheet of heat and steel. The smell of jet fuel hung thick in the air, mingling with the salt spray drifting from the ocean far below. Engines idled, with a low, throaty growl in the background, their exhaust rolling in shimmering waves past lines of yellow-shirted flight directors and green-shirted catapult crews. And then everything stopped. It was rare for the deck to go quiet during flight operations, but the moment Admiral Harlan's voice cut through the static and the roar of turbines, the air itself seemed to tense. Petty Officer Elena Torres. His voice boomed from the bridge speakers, each word punctuated like a gavel. You are hereby relieved of duty. Effective immediately. Heads turned. Deckhands froze mid-task. The two jet pilots strapped into their cockpits turned there, helmets slightly toward the sound, their tinted visors hiding their expressions. Even the catapult officer paused, his hand hovering mid-air over the signal baton. Elena Torres stood at attention near the nose of an Fi-18 Hornet, her boots squared perfectly on the deck's painted lines. She didn't flinch. She didn't move. The only giveaway was the muscle along her jaw, tight as if she were clenching her teeth. Harlan didn't stop there. He stepped forward on the bridge, hands gripping the metal railing, his hat shadowing his face. His voice carried down with an edge that made even veteran sailors uncomfortable. Reckless conduct, direct violation of safety protocols, disregard for chain of command. It wasn't just an order, it was a verdict, delivered in front of nearly 100 crew members, pilots, and officers. Gasps rippled through the deck. Elena's demotion wasn't subtle. It was public, deliberate, and humiliating. The bosun's mate, standing just 3 feet away from her, looked like he wanted to disappear. Torres, he muttered under his breath, eyes darting between her and the Admiral. She cut him off without looking. Don't. The Admiral's voice thundered again. Petty Officer Torres is relieved from her post as deck crew chief. Effective now. She will return to her quarters until further notice. The yellow-shirted flight deck officer beside her shifted awkwardly, his whistle hanging loose in his hand. He looked like he wanted to speak up, but one look from the Admiral's glare silenced him. Elena's heart thudded against her ribs. Not from fear, but from the rage she was holding back like a storm behind a dam. But she stayed silent. She knew the game. Speak out now, and the Admiral would have her escorted off the deck in handcuffs. She gave a single nod. Aye, sir? The Admiral turned sharply, striding back from the bridge's railing. He clearly thought the matter settled. The moment his shadow disappeared from view, the whispers began. What the hell happened? She's the best crew chief we've got. He's been gunning for her since the incident last month. No way she deserved that. No way. Elena kept her posture straight as she stepped away from the jet, her boots clicking against the non-skid surface of the deck. She didn't make eye contact with anyone. She didn't have to. She could feel their eyes following her, tracking the sudden fall of one of the Navy's most respected deck leaders. The jets were still idling, pilots waiting for clearance. Catapult crews were trying to get their focus back, but the energy on deck had shifted. Flight ops ran on precision and confidence. What had just happened had shaken both. A younger deckhand fresh out of training, still unsure of his place, leaned toward another. Why'd he do it now? In front of everyone? The older sailor just shook his head. He wanted to make an example of her. Elena didn't bother defending herself. Let them talk. She'd learned long ago that rumors on a carrier traveled faster than the jets. By now, some version of the story would be circulating in the mess, the hangar bay, maybe even the comms rooms. The truth? The truth was simpler and more dangerous. But she didn't get the chance to think about it for long. The shrill, rising wail of an alarm cut across the deck. It wasn't the deep klaxon of a collision drill, or the steady tone of a fire alert. It was sharp, urgent, and mechanical. A fault alarm. Elena's head turned instantly toward the sound, eyes narrowing. It came from the Hornet still sitting. Armed gun catapult 2. The red warning light near the cockpit flashed in rhythm with the alarm, the aircraft's nose twitching slightly as the pilot adjusted his controls. She didn't even need to hear the comms to know what was happening. She'd seen this exact fault before months ago, on another Hornet. Back then, it had been a faulty sensor feed to the flight computer, preventing the launch system from giving final clearance. It was rare, and most crew wouldn't even recognize it before wasting critical minutes running diagnostics. And minutes right now were dangerous. The Admiral hadn't noticed yet. From the bridge, his attention was probably already on the next operational report or the radar screens. But Elena could feel the urgency like a pressure in her chest. Something about the tension in the air told her the launch wasn't just routine. Training. Something was coming. She didn't move, not yet. She could fix that Hornet in under 10 seconds if she got close. But she was no longer crew chief. If she stepped back into the launch area without authorization, it would be more than insubordination. It would be career suicide. Still, her eyes flicked toward the jet's pilot. Even from 20 feet away, she could see his helmet tilt slightly in her direction. She didn't know if it was instinct or desperation, but she read it clearly. He wanted her to take the shot. And somewhere deep in the pit of her stomach, Elena Torres knew one thing. If she didn't, the Independence might not have a shot left to take. The decision was coming, and it was going to happen fast. 2 years earlier, Elena Torres was untouchable. On her very first deployment, the older deckhands joked that she'd been born wearing a cranial headset and holding a signal wand. She had a sixth sense for aircraft, able to diagnose issues just by the pitch of an engine or the flicker of a cockpit display. The pilots learned quickly. If Torres was on the deck crew, you could trust your jet was ready to fly, no matter the conditions. She wasn't just good, she was fast. During carrier qualifications, she once prepped and launched 3 Hornets in less time than it took another crew to launch one. In heavy weather, she directed launches with a kind of calm precision that made even nervous rookies relax. Pilots who'd been in combat zones said they'd never seen anyone work with her level of focus. But perfection on a flight deck isn't just about skill, it's about politics. And Torres had never been good at politics. She called out safety violations when she saw them. She refused to sign off on equipment she didn't think was ready. And she didn't care if the person she was arguing with had more stripes on their sleeve than she did. It was that attitude that had drawn the attention, and eventually the ire of Admiral Harlan. Their conflict started small. A disagreement over maintenance windows. A refusal to rush a launch when Torres spotted a hydraulic leak. But the real breaking point came 3 weeks ago during a joint exercise in the Pacific. The carrier was running a tight schedule. Weather was moving in, and the Admiral wanted all aircraft airborne before a squall shut down the deck. One of the Hornets slated for launch had been acting up for days. Torres had already logged multiple sensor errors in the system, and that morning she'd found another fault in the radar array. The pilot commander trusted her enough to delay, but the Admiral did not. The confrontation had been short and ugly. Harlan ordered the launch. Torres stood her ground, refusing to give the clearance signal. She locked eyes with him, her expression steady but unyielding, and said the 4 words that would put a target on her back. "It's not flight ready." Minutes later, the Hornet was pulled from the rotation, but the Admiral didn't forget or forgive the challenge to his authority. In the days that followed, Torres felt the shift. Inspections became stricter only for her section. Paperwork started coming back incomplete, even when she knew it was flawless. She was reassigned from high-priority launches to secondary duties. It was clear the Admiral was waiting for the right moment to make his point. And now, on a sweltering day in the middle of active flight ops, he'd found it. Her demotion hadn't just been about a supposed protocol breach. It was about sending a message. No one on his deck defied him and walked away untouched. But the Admiral underestimated her in one key way. Stripping her rank didn't strip her knowledge. Even as she stepped away from her station, Torres's mind didn't stop scanning the deck. She saw every little thing, the shimmer of jet exhaust bending the air over Catapult 1, the way a crewman's headset cable snagged briefly on a deck. Cleat, the too-sharp whine of a Hornet engine spooling under partial power. And then came the alarm. It was faint at first, almost lost in the layered noise of turbines and wind, but she knew the tone instantly. It was the telltale System Inhibit alert, signaling that the aircraft's launch interlock wasn't giving the green light to the catapult. Her stomach sank. She didn't have to guess the cause. This was the same rare fault she'd seen on a different Hornet last month. The launch system wasn't getting a clean data feed from the jet's onboard sensors. 99% of the time, this would just mean a delayed launch, maybe swapping the aircraft out for another. But in her gut, Torres knew this wasn't routine. Something in the pilot's voice over the comms, a tight, clipped tone, told her there was urgency. She couldn't hear every word from this distance, but she caught enough. Launch window. Radar contact, hostile range. Her pulse spiked. Enemy radar contact meant the carrier wasn't as invisible as it wanted to be. And if that Hornet didn't get airborne in the next 90 seconds, the ship's defensive position would be compromised. Torres scanned the deck crew around Catapult 2. Most of them were rookies, competent, but not experienced enough to troubleshoot this fast. The launch officer was already crouched by the jet's nose gear, headset pressed to his ear, talking with the shooter. They were losing time. She took a step forward before she realized what she was doing. Then she stopped. She was no longer authorized to be there. The Admiral had just publicly stripped her of authority minutes ago. If she crossed that deck and inserted herself into an active launch without clearance, it would be career suicide. But every second they wasted, the danger grew. Her eyes flicked to the pilot. His helmeted head tilted slightly toward her position. It was subtle, just enough for her to see, but it was deliberate. He knew she was the only one who could fix this in time. It wasn't an order. It wasn't even a request. But it was a plea, carried in a silent look across a deck, vibrating with tension. The kind of plea you didn't ignore when the clock was ticking and the stakes were measured in lives. Torres's breath slowed, her focus narrowing. In her mind, she was already running through the steps approach from portside, bypass the launch officer's headset comms, reconnect the feed cable, check the sensor light, and signal green. She could do it in under 10 seconds if no one got in her way. Her fingertips flexed. All she needed was the will to cross the invisible line. The Admiral had drawn, and she was just about to do it. The alarm blared again, this time sharper, more insistent, like a red-hot needle piercing through the layered roar of engines and wind. On Catapult 2, the FA-18 Hornet sat locked into position, its sleek nose aimed toward the endless Pacific horizon. Heat rippled off its twin engines, distorting the view behind it like a mirage. The pilot's gloved hands moved over the controls with controlled urgency, but his voice over the comms betrayed the pressure he was under. Tower, this is Reaper 1. Confirming launch window down to 60 seconds. Radar confirms hostile. Contact at range. Requesting immediate go. The words cut through the carrier's comm network like a blade. Torres froze mid-step. Hostile contact. That wasn't training language. That wasn't an exercise scenario. On a carrier deck, hostile contact meant the ship was in the crosshairs of something, anything from an enemy, drone to a long-range anti-ship missile. And the first line of defense wasn't the ship's own missile batteries. It was the aircraft on that deck getting airborne fast enough to intercept the threat before it closed in. Catapult 2's crew scrambled, the green-shirted technicians, diving to check their stations. The shooter crouched low near the jet's front wheel, head set tight against his ear, trying to get confirmation from the tower. The yellow-shirted deck officer kept one hand raised, signaling hold to the pilot. They had seconds, not minutes, and they were burning them. Torres's eyes darted to the Hornet's forward fuselage. She knew the fault exactly. She'd seen it before, right down to the blinking amber sensor light just under the cockpit. The onboard system wasn't sending the all-clear signal to the catapult control. Without it, the launch sequence was locked. The fix was so simple, it was almost stupid. Reconnect the data feed cable, reset the circuit, confirm the green light, and give the launch hand signal. Done in 10 seconds if you knew exactly where to look. But the crew on Catapult 2 didn't. They were checking the wrong panels. One even glanced toward the aft fuselage, a waste of precious seconds. The Hornet's engine screamed as the pilot pushed the throttle slightly, eager to go, but the shooter held firm. Torres's gut twisted. From the bridge tower, Admiral Harlan was still visible, standing near the glass, his cap low over his brow. She couldn't see his expression, but she could imagine his eyes narrowed, scanning his deck, pleased to see her sidelined, certain this launch would go through without her. She glanced back at the Hornet. The pilot's helmet turned ever so slightly in her direction again, visor catching the midday light. It wasn't a command. It wasn't even a gesture. But it was enough. Torres felt the vibration of the engines through the deck, the deep bass note reverberating up her boots and into her bones. Her training told her the truth she didn't want to admit. If that jet didn't launch within the next 30 seconds, the ship's margin for safety would be gone. She'd worked on decks long enough to feel the tempo of danger without needing to see it on radar. This was one of those moments where hesitation could cost lives. Around her, the rest of the flight deck seemed oblivious to the stakes. Crew were still handling other jets, fueling, moving equipment, giving casual signals to pilots waiting for their turn. The noise and movement made it easy for someone to miss how critical Catapult 2's situation had become. But Torres saw it with crystal clarity. If I step in now, I fix it, the jet goes, and maybe we live to see dinner. If I stay put, maybe someone else figures it out. Or maybe we take a hit and lose more than a jet. Her hands flexed involuntarily, muscle memory urging her forward. She knew exactly where to run, how to get around the shooter without blocking his view, how to reset the system without even looking down. But she also knew Admiral Harlan had eyes everywhere. The moment she stepped into that launch zone without clearance, she'd be violating orders in the most public way possible, just minutes after being demoted. This wasn't just insubordination. This was career suicide in real time. The comms crackled again, this time sharper, more urgent. Reaper 1, be advised hostile speed increasing. Window now 20 seconds. Torres's heartbeat cinched with the countdown in her head. 20 seconds. Maybe less if the ship's speed and wind worked against them. One of the rookies on the crew finally spotted the sensor light and crouched to investigate, but Torres could tell from his position he didn't even know the panel release code. He fumbled with the latch. 10 seconds lost minimum. She bit the inside of her cheek, so hard she tasted blood. It wasn't pride pushing her. Now it was instinct. She wasn't thinking about her rank, her record, or even the Admiral watching from above. She was thinking about the men and women on this carrier, the people whose faces she saw every day in the mess, the pilots whose lives depended on every launch being perfect. And she knew, with bone-deep certainty, that if she didn't act, that Hornet wasn't getting airborne in time. Her breathing slowed, not from hesitation, but from focus. The world narrowed. The Hornet's nose cone, the deck crew, the shooter's stance, the exact distance between her boots and the launch zone. Her mind counted down with the radar clock. 10 seconds. 8. 7. Torres's jaw set. The decision was made. She stepped forward. The roar of the carrier's engines was a constant, like the heartbeat of a steel giant adrift in the vast Pacific. The deck crew moved with precision, each action choreographed to keep the flight line running smoothly. Yet today, there was a tension in the air that even the salt spray couldn't wash away. Everyone knew something was brewing. Ava had kept her head down since the demotion. Her nameplate was gone from her workstation. The patch on her sleeve now read Airman, stripped. Of the petty officer rank she had worked years to earn. And yet, she still moved with the same calculated discipline, her eyes constantly scanning, her mind calculating every moving piece of the deck. The Admiral, Thomas Keating, stood at the island's observation platform, his binoculars resting on the rail. His sharp eyes caught every motion, every hesitation, every slip-up. He didn't just see the crew, he measured them. And Ava, whether she liked it or not, was still under his microscope. Down on the deck, an FA-18 Hornet was being prepped for launch. It was routine, until it wasn't. A sudden crackle of the comms broke through the steady rhythm. Tower. We have an issue with Catapult 2 hydraulics. Recommend holding launch. The aircraft's pilot, Lieutenant Jared Hawk Lawson, was already spooling up his engines. Any delay now risked throwing off the launch sequence for the rest of the air wing. That meant possible mission delays. And on a carrier, delays could mean lives. Ava was on the starboard catwalk when she noticed something the others missed. A shimmer of vapor trailing from a hydraulic coupling. Her training kicked in instantly. That wasn't just a minor leak. If the catapult fired under those conditions, the force could destabilize the launch track, sending the jet into the ocean. She reached for her headset, but the comms officer brushed her off. You're not on this channel anymore, Airman. Her jaw clenched. She wasn't about to watch a preventable disaster unfold just because she had been silenced. Without a second thought, she sprinted across the deck, ducking under moving aircraft wings and weaving through the line crew until she reached the launch crew chief. You can't fire that cat, she shouted over the engines. Hydraulic vapor on the starboard feed. You'll send him overboard. The chief looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Airman, you're not authorized. But in that exact second, Ava's eyes met the pilot's. Through the tinted canopy, Lawson's gaze locked on hers. She made the universal signal, a slicing motion across her throat, the abort hand sign used only in emergencies. Time slowed. Lawson cut his engines without hesitation, trusting a crew member who wasn't even in his chain of command anymore. The steam from the catapult drifted away, revealing the thin spray from the leak just as the maintenance crew rushed in to inspect. The hydraulic line was one launch away from catastrophic failure. On the observation platform, Admiral Keating's binoculars lowered. His jaw tightened. He had just watched the airman he'd demoted save a $70 million jet, and possibly the life of one of his best pilots, with nothing but a hand signal and sheer nerve. The deck crew stood in stunned silence for a moment before the maintenance chief barked orders. The leak was sealed off, the launch reset, and Lawson taxied to Catapult 3. Within minutes, the jet roared into the sky, mission intact. As the Hornet vanished into the clouds, Keating descended the ladder from the platform. The crew parted. For him like the tide, their eyes flicking between him and Ava. He stopped 3 feet away from her, the wind tugging at his immaculate uniform. "You broke protocol," he said, voice low but cutting through the deck noise. "Yes, sir," Ava replied without flinching. "You also prevented a fatal launch accident," he continued, his eyes narrowing as if trying to read her soul. "Do you always make a habit of disobeying orders when you think you're right?" Ava's answer was immediate. "Only when it matters, sir." A flicker of something, irritation, respect, maybe both, crossed the Admiral's face. He gave a short nod, then turned to the chief. "Get her back on the launch team." It was not a reinstatement of her rank, not yet, but it was the first crack in the wall between them. That night, as the carrier cut through black water under a blanket of stars, Ava replayed the day's events in her mind. She knew Keating wasn't done testing her, and deep down, she knew the real storm hadn't hit yet. Because sometimes, the moment before the storm is the most dangerous place to be. The rain had cleared, but the deck was slick, reflecting the orange glow of the carrier's floodlights. Somewhere far off, lightning still flashed, illuminating the Pacific horizon in fleeting bursts. Amelia Red Callahan stood at the edge of the launch area, headset in place, fluorescent paddles at her sides, eyes locked on the roaring FA-18 that was seconds from launch. To anyone watching, she looked calm, too calm for someone who had been publicly demoted just 2 days earlier. But inside, her mind was a checklist of wind direction, deck pitch, catapult tension, and the readiness of the pilot's eyes behind. The visor. A launch wasn't about brute force. It was about timing, precision, and trust. "Red, Cat 2 ready for final." The voice crackled through her headset. She took 2 steps forward, boots gripping the wet non-skid surface, and gave a rotating arm signal toward the pilot. The jet's engines roared louder, the afterburners glowing hot. The smell of burnt jet fuel mixed with the salty sea air. A smell she had lived with for years, one that never failed to make her chest tighten with pride. On the platform above, Admiral Garrison stood with arms crossed, watching her every move. His presence was like a weight pressing down on her shoulders. He'd already stripped her of her rank in front of the crew. Now it felt like he was waiting for her to fail again. But Red didn't give him the satisfaction. She slid her left paddle upward, crouched low, and with a sharp motion, signaled the final clearance. The deck crew moved like synchronized cogs. A quick thumbs up from the shooter, a knee drop, and the signal was given. In that split second, the catapult slammed the jet forward. The FA-18 shot off the deck into the dark Pacific, disappearing into the black night as its afterburners left a brief streak of orange. The deck vibrated beneath Red's boots, a sensation she knew better than her own heartbeat. But there was no time to savor the launch. The next aircraft was already taxiing into position. She pivoted, her mind shifting instantly to the new jet, scanning it for anomalies. Wing flaps, gear locks, payload stability. She had been nicknamed the eyes of the deck for a reason. She caught what others missed. And tonight, her skill was about to be tested. Halfway through the launch cycle, something felt wrong. The pilot's wing position seemed slightly uneven, a barely perceptible tilt that no one else had noticed. To an untrained eye, it was nothing. To Red, it screamed danger. She stepped forward, slicing her paddle across her chest in a halt signal. The engines roared in protest, but she held her ground. "What's the hold, Callahan?" The shooter's voice was impatient. She moved to the jet, squatting to inspect the left wing flap. Rainwater pooled near the hinge, masking a jam in the hydraulic line. If that jet had launched, her stomach tightened at the thought. A failed flap at high speed would have sent the aircraft into a fatal roll. She looked up at the pilot and gave a firm headshake. Abort launch. The deck. Crew moved fast, towing the jet back while the next in line moved forward. Red's heart was pounding, not from the adrenaline of the catch, but from the knowledge that Admiral Garrison had seen the entire thing. On the platform, his posture had shifted. No more arms crossed in disapproval. Instead, he leaned forward, elbows on the railing, eyes locked on her. Red didn't meet his gaze. She was too busy guiding the next fighter into launch position, signaling the deck crew like a conductor with an orchestra. Every launch was a symphony of trust and timing, and she wasn't about to let a single note falter. By the time the last jet cleared the deck, the night was deep and the horizon was beginning to pale at the first hint of dawn. Her uniform was soaked, her shoulders ached, and her boots were coated in salt spray. But every single aircraft had launched safely, and every pilot had returned to the sky intact. As she removed her headset and tucked her paddles under her arm, she felt a shadow beside her. It was Admiral Garrison. "Callahan," he said, his tone measured. "That was one hell of a save." She glanced at him, unsure whether to speak. "You kept a man alive tonight," he continued. "Maybe more than one." His gaze lingered for a moment before he added, "Demotion or not, you just proved why you were on my deck in the first place." Red simply nodded, her expression unreadable. She didn't do this for recognition. She did it because the deck demanded it, because every jet that left the carrier was a promise to bring a pilot home. As the Admiral walked away, the first full rays of sunlight broke over the ocean, painting the slick deck in gold. For the first time in days, Red allowed herself the smallest of smiles. Tomorrow, there would be more launches, more storms, and maybe more battles with brass. But tonight, or rather this morning, she'd earned something more valuable than her rank. She'd earned the silent respect of the man who had tried to break her. And on a carrier, sometimes respect was the only currency that mattered. The roar of the F-18's engines still echoed across the carrier deck, but now it was joined by something else, a low, pulsing alarm that sent a shiver down the spine of every sailor within earshot. The operations officer's voice cut through. The static on the loudspeakers, his tone sharp, urgent. Radar contact. Multiple fast-moving bogies, 200 nautical miles out. No IFF signal. All eyes on the deck froze for a heartbeat. That meant only one thing: unknown aircraft, moving. Fast, possibly hostile. Kara's heart kicked into overdrive. She was still standing near the bow, the faint smell of jet exhaust clinging to her uniform. She didn't need to ask what was going on. She could read the tension in the crew's body language. The petty officers were shouting commands, handlers were scrambling to secure the deck, and ordnance crews were racing carts of missiles toward the ready aircraft. But what caught her attention most was the Admiral standing stiff, his jaw tight, issuing rapid-fire orders to the Combat Information Center over his headset. She could see it in his face. This wasn't a drill. Within seconds, the calm, ordered chaos of flight ops shifted into pure combat readiness. The yellow shirts, those who directed aircraft, were now waving furiously, clearing space for emergency launches. Pilots were sprinting to their jets, strapping in, engines spooling up in quick succession. Kara instinctively moved toward the jet she'd helped launch earlier. The deck was a blur of activity, but she found herself right back at the same catapult. Another crew member tried to wave her off. "You're not on duty for this, get below," he shouted over the noise. But Kara didn't move. Something inside her, the same instinct that had pushed her to act earlier, was telling her that she was needed here. Above the deck, the skies were deceptively calm, a pale blue horizon stretching endlessly. But below that serenity, tension buzzed like a live wire. The ship's radar was tracking the incoming contact 6 fast movers. Altitude climbing, heading directly for the carrier strike group. One of the deck officers, LT, Commander Harris, stormed toward Kara, frustration flashing in his eyes. You're still here? You've already caused enough trouble today." Before he could finish, the Admiral's voice barked over the comms. "We've got 2 birds ready, 1 more in 30 seconds. Catapult 2 needs to go now." Catapult 2, the very spot where Kara was standing. Harris hesitated, looking around for the designated shooter. But the man was nowhere to be seen. He was still on the far end of the deck, assisting with another emergency launch. The seconds were ticking away, and in a situation like this, every heartbeat counted. Kara knew the procedure. She'd been through enough training to understand the hand signals, the safety protocols, the rhythm of a launch. The pilot in the cockpit was looking down the deck toward her, canopy closed, giving a thumbs up. He was ready, but without an official shooter, he couldn't move. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She didn't have clearance. She didn't have rank. But she had the knowledge, and she could see the clock running out. She stepped forward. The crew members around her shouted in protest, but Kara ignored them. She made eye contact with the pilot, then looked to the catapult officer, who was glancing around, desperate for someone to take control. For a fraction of a second, their eyes met. He hesitated, then gave a single, sharp nod. Kara dropped to one knee, braced against the deck, extended her arm forward with her index finger stabbing toward the horizon, the unmistakable launch signal. The pilot's head snapped forward, engines screaming as the jet strained against the catapult. She rotated her hand sharply, the motion crisp, professional, impossible to mistake. The shooter crew followed her lead without pause. The steam catapult roared. The jet shot forward in a blur, leaping into the air, wheels tucking in as it climbed, sharply into the sky. For a moment, there was silence, just the sound of the ocean wind and the diminishing roar of the fighter. Then, the deck erupted in shouts. Some were furious. Others were stunned. And a few those who'd seen the precision in her movements were quietly impressed. Kara didn't look at the Admiral. She didn't need to. She could feel his eyes burning into her from across the deck. She knew she'd just crossed a line that could end her career before it had even begun. But the comms crackled again, and this time, the voice carried a new urgency. First contact in 60 seconds. All remaining birds, prepare for launch. This is not a drill. The Admiral's glare lingered for a heartbeat longer. Then he turned away and barked into his headset, ordering the next launch. Above, the first FA-18 Kara had helped launch earlier was already banking toward the incoming formation. Now, the second jet, the one she had just sent airborne, was climbing fast to join him. From the deck, Kara watched the 2 fighters carve through the sky, their wingtips glinting in the sunlight. It was a beautiful sight, but it was about to become deadly serious. One of the deck crew leaned toward her, voice low but audible over the noise. "You know you're in deep trouble, right?" Kara's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Maybe, but at least they're up there when it matters." And deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Not the mission. Not the incoming threat. And certainly not her story. The ocean stretched endlessly beneath a bruised gray sky, the USS Independence cutting through it like a blade. The deck crew worked in precise, rapid motions, launching and recovering jets in a rhythm that felt like war drums. Every move had purpose. Every hand signal meant life or death. But deep inside the Combat Information Center, warnings lit up the radar screens. The watch officer's voice was tight. Multiple bogeys. Closing fast. Unidentified. No transponders. Within seconds, the coded alert flashed through the ship. Possible hostile aircraft inbound. Pilots scrambled. Deck crew locked down every moving part. The chatter on the radios grew clipped, focused, and urgent. Among the yellow vests on deck, Lieutenant Jenna Cole's eyes locked on the unfolding chaos. Her headset crackled with partial transmissions, but she didn't need words to know what this meant. She had seen this pattern before, the shift from routine to potential combat in the space of a heartbeat. "Jenna." The voice came from her right. Chief Ramos, one of the few who'd stood by her after the Admiral's public demotion. Weeks earlier. "We've got birds that need to be in the air yesterday. Think you can handle Cat 2? She didn't answer with words. Just a sharp nod, helmet visor snapping down. She sprinted toward the launch catapult, like a sprinter hitting the last 100 meters of a race. Above them, the ship's loudspeakers blared. "Flight deck is now red. All hands, brace for possible engagement." The crew's movements turned, almost surgical in their precision. The next FA-18 on deck, calcined Sabre 2-1, rolled into position. The pilot, a young lieutenant barely a year out of training, looked tense, almost frozen. This wasn't a drill. Jenna caught his eye through the canopy. Even under his oxygen mask, she could read his hesitation, the split second of doubt. That could cost them precious time. She stepped closer, motioning him to watch her. Hand signals. Calm, deliberate, exact. She moved like she was back in the simulator, but sharper, more certain. Her gestures weren't just commands. They were reassurance, telling the pilot, "You've got this. I've got you." The steam from the catapult hissed like a dragon waking up. Crew members cleared to safe zones. Jenna leaned into the wind, giving the final run-up signal. The jet's twin engines roared to life, vibrating the deck beneath her boots. Then, the hand signal. Not rushed, not sloppy. Smooth, precise. The one she had trained for years to perfect. The catapult slammed forward. The FA-18 shot down the deck, nose lifting into the air in a clean arc, disappearing into the low cloud ceiling. One down. She didn't stop to watch. Another jet was already rolling forward. Viper 4-2. This one carried heavier payload, anti-ship, and anti-air missiles. Her hands moved before her mind even caught up. Point, roll, lock, throttle, launch, 2 down. Her visor's edge was fogged with sweat, but she didn't dare wipe it. The wind on the deck was slicing cold, the noise deafening, but adrenaline drowned it all out. In moments, she was living the reason she'd joined the Navy in the first place. Pure, unfiltered execution under fire. A third jet approached. The pilot's helmet visor was up, eyes wide, scanning the deck like he'd never seen combat readiness this close before. Jenna's gestures cut through his uncertainty, each movement like a conductor's baton, keeping the symphony in time. Steam, signal, launch. The radio cracked over her headset. Sabre 2-1 to Independence. Visual on hostiles. Range 70. Miles and closing. Requesting support. Her pulse spiked. These weren't just blips on her radar anymore. They were coming. The deck was nearly empty now. The last wave of aircraft prepped to launch. Jenna signaled the crew to double time. This wasn't the moment to think about what the Admiral thought of her, or the smirks she'd endured when she was stripped of rank. This was the moment to prove why she'd earned her place in the first place. The last jet roared down Cat 1, just as the ship's general alarm screamed again, impact possible within minutes. She yanked her headset to full volume, listening. For the pilots' voices over the comms. They were engaging now. The battle was in the sky. From the starboard side, the Admiral himself stepped onto the deck. His uniform jacket whipped in the wind, cap held down with one hand. His eyes tracked the last jet disappearing into the clouds, then locked on her. For a second, the chaos seemed to fade. His gaze wasn't angry, wasn't smug. It was something else, recognition. The incoming threat was still real, but at that moment, Jenna knew something had shifted. Not in the sky. Not on the radar. Here, on the deck, where the Admiral had once humiliated her in front of the entire crew. He'd just seen her do what she did best, under pressure, without hesitation, without ego. The battle wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. But for the first time since her demotion, she felt the weight on her shoulders lift, just enough to let her breathe. The next call over the radio was clear and urgent. Multiple bandits down, returning to base, stand by for recovery ops. She looked toward the horizon, where the sky was now a blur of jet exhaust and distant flashes of light. Her hands were still shaking, but she stood ready, eyes locked forward. The fight had come to them, and she had met it head-on. The carrier's deck was alive with sound the pounding roar of engines, the crackle of the intercom, the clatter of tools from the maintenance crews. But for Commander Alana Vega, every noise felt muted compared to the weight of what was about to happen. The day had begun with an unspoken tension running through the entire crew, and now it was about to erupt into something that would mark her forever. Only hours earlier, she'd been demoted in front of the entire deck crew by Admiral Kane, a man who believed in strict protocol and unyielding discipline. Vega had been stripped of her formal role and told to remain as a deck crew specialist, a symbolic gesture meant to show the rest of the crew that no one, not even a decorated officer, was above regulations. But as events unfolded, Kane had seen something different in her quiet, razor-sharp competence that didn't vanish under pressure. Now, with the wind whipping across the deck and the ocean glinting in the early morning sun, Kane stood at the edge of the command platform, arms folded. His eyes were locked on Vega. She, in turn, wasn't looking at him at all. She was focused on the FA-18 Super Hornet that was positioned at Catapult 2, its nose pointed toward the horizon like a spear ready to be thrown. The jet's mission was critical real-time reconnaissance on an escalating situation near contested waters. The pilot had been cleared for launch, but a systems glitch in the deck's signaling equipment had caused a momentary delay. On an aircraft carrier, delays were dangerous. Timing mattered down to the second. Too long, and the launch window was gone. Too slow, and the pilot's fuel calculations wouldn't hold. That's when Vega moved. Without being ordered, she stepped into the launch path, her boots clanging against the metal deck, her fluorescent vest glowing against the haze. Her headset crackled with half-finished orders from the deck control, but she ignored them. Instead, she crouched low, making eye contact with the pilot through the canopy. She raised her right hand in a sharp, deliberate motion, the universal hand signal for standby, then pointed down the deck to confirm the catapult crew was ready. The pilot gave a quick nod. Vega scanned the deck. Safety crews were in position. Blast deflectors raised, wings aligned for takeoff. She dropped her arm, rotating her wrist with precision, signaling the pilot to advance to full throttle. The jet's twin engines roared, the carrier shuddered, and heat waves rippled the air. Everyone on deck felt the vibration through there. Boots. Then came the moment. Vega stepped to the side, planted her feet, and sliced her arm forward in a clean, authoritative launch signal. In an instant, the catapult engaged. The Super Hornet shot forward like a slingshot missile, wheels leaving the deck in a perfect liftoff. The sound was deafening, the wind from the jet wash nearly knocking smaller crew members off balance. The plane climbed into the sky, banking east toward its mission. And in that single motion, Kane's opinion of her changed. The crew's reaction was immediate. Even over the noise, there was a ripple of murmurs, some of them barely hiding admiration. What Vega had just done wasn't just procedure. It was instinct sharpened by years of experience. She hadn't hesitated. She hadn't second-guessed. She had owned the deck in that moment. Kane's jaw tightened, but not from disapproval. He had been in the Navy for decades, and he knew leadership when he saw it. It wasn't always about giving orders. It was about knowing when to act, even when the situation was off script. And Vega had just written her own script out as she walked back toward her position. Kane descended from the platform. The salty wind carried the scent of jet fuel and hot steel between them. When he reached her, the deck seemed to pause not in silence, but in awareness. Conversation slowed. Tools stopped clinking. The crew wanted to see what would happen. Kane stopped 2 feet away from her, his cap shadowing his eyes. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, to the astonishment of every sailor on deck, he raised his hand, not to point, not to reprimand, but to give her the sharp, formal salute reserved for respect between equals. Vega froze for a second, unsure if she was reading the gesture correctly. But when Kane held it, unwavering, she returned the salute. No words were exchanged, but the message was clear. The demotion was nothing compared to the authority she had just proven in front of the crew. Kane finally spoke, his voice low enough that only she could hear over the deck noise. "Never let me underestimate you again, Commander." Then he stepped back, turned, and returned to the command platform, leaving Vega standing there with the weight of the moment settling in her chest, not around her. The crew resumed work, but something had shifted. She could feel it in the way they looked at her, not as someone who had been publicly disciplined, but as someone who had stood her ground and proven her worth in the most unforgiving environment in the Navy. As the Super Hornet's distant engine rumble faded into the horizon, Vega glanced out toward the endless blue. The job wasn't over. Another launch cycle would begin soon, and the sea would test them again. But she was ready, more than ready. On that flight deck, respect wasn't given freely. It was earned, sometimes in the quiet of routine, sometimes in the heat of split-second decisions. And that morning, Alana Vega had earned it in front of every witness who mattered. She didn't need to tell anyone who she was. The deck had seen it. The Admiral had seen it. And from this day forward, they would never forget.